Welcome back to 101 East. Now, while casinos rake in profits, not much attention is paid to those whose lives are affected by gambling. We meet one man who watched his family disintegrate because of his wife's addiction.
I'm Chan Gong Liu. I'm 40 years old. I have a wife and 2 sons. I've been married for 13 years. My wife started gambling 3 years ago. Her addiction was so bad every day. She'd gamble with more than 50,000. She started borrowing from her friends until they stopped lending her money. Then she started borrowing from loan sharks. At first, her debt was just over 10,000. Later, it became 100,000. At first, I hoped she would change and quit gambling. I gave her another chance and helped pay off her debts. I never thought of divorcing her. I just wanted her to stop gambling. But she kept gambling, and her relatives refused to help pay her debts. She vented her anger on our sons and threatened to hurt them. Once, she threw a bottle on the floor and wanted to make our children walk on the broken glass with their bare feet unless her relatives pay off her debts. Another time, she threatened to throw herself and our 3-year-old son onto an oncoming traffic and die together. I used to stay in a very nice house. We had a car and I had my own business. But within 1 year, I lost everything. I have nowhere to stay. My kids are in foster care. I could never imagine my wife would change and become a different woman. Her gambling broke up my family.
Well, just to inform you, 101 East did contact casino operators from Macau, Singapore, Malaysia, the US and Australia, and none of them were prepared to take part in today's conversation. The people who were are still with me in the studio. Dr. Jayeera Muthuswamy from Kent State University in Ohio, Dr. P. Sundaramurthy from the University of Science, Malaysia, and by satellite, Robert Mittiger from Australia. Robert, I guess the story you've just heard is one that you have heard over and over and over again. To what extent do you think that the casino operators themselves are responsible for this? And to what extent do you go along with Jayeera's contention that there is an element of personal responsibility?
What we have to understand is by allowing these industries to develop, we also understand, we also have to understand and take responsibility for the fact that these industries create illness. Now, illness is addiction. Addiction is an illness. People that become gambling addicts are not morally weak. They're not some weak characters. We're talking about neurological disease.
Sure, but you say that the casinos create this illness. Is that the case, or does that illness exist anyway?
The product that they're selling, absolutely, it is a highly addictive, it has highly addictive properties.
No difference to the sale of alcohol and tobacco as well. You're literally advocating prohibition.
That's correct.
I mean, then all outlets that sells alcohol and tobacco should be shut down, and that's not a social reality. It will not happen in our lifetimes.
Look, you please hear me. I'm not pushing prohibition. Prohibition is not the answer. The answer is that governments need to understand, right, that some of the consequences of gambling and alcohol and tobacco cause illness. Okay, we accept that alcohol causes illness, we accept that cigarettes cause illness, but what we haven't accepted in the general population and in governments is that gambling causes illness.
Have you seen governments actually begin, and economists to a certain extent, begin to see the necessity for factoring in costs such as this into the benefits of things like
well, there's a very famous line from Chicago which has got to do with this analogous concept called market efficiency, which is that you don't allow insiders to trade in the stock market. Why? Because you're not having a level playing field. There's a tight analogy here. So the Chicago economists at one extreme would say legalize insider trading and the markets become more efficient. That analogy would be that if you don't allow people to do it legally, then it doesn't become a black market kind of thing. But let's not forget, there's a big divide right now between the Western economies and the Eastern economies. Right here, right now here, we're trying to modernize. The globalization shifts. We want to be more like, say, Monte Carlo. Look at Monte Carlo. It's the epitome of gambling. Everything there is gambling. Is that the extreme that we should study? Yes. Over in Monte Carlo, we used to make a joke that...
however, can I just interject there?
Let me just finish. With Monte Carlo... In Monte Carlo, you have the joke that if you lose a lot and you don't feel good, they give you a pistol room to commit suicide. Now, of course, it's a bit of a joke, but in some sense, Louis Pascal and Bernoulli, the guys who invented all these games, were from the avant-garde in the French society of 200 years ago. And if you look at the Western way of looking at entertainment value, I think there's a control there, which is at the personal level. I think we Asian economies have a lot to learn there, and to have a hear no evil, see no evil.
Robert, what was your comeback on that?
The issue, though, with Monte Carlo, you have to understand that in many parts of Europe, such as Monte Carlo and some of the other European cities with gambling casinos, they're not set up for the local public. They're set up as tourism, for tourism. They're set up for people who
Is that any less dangerous?
Gamble. It limits the exposure to the average person.
But what it would also seem to do is abdicate the government's responsibility. If they say they're not even my national citizen, I don't have to pay attention to taking care of them, surely.
Well, yeah, you could argue that.
Let me bring in a point that you made earlier on, and that is the effects of control. Prohibition was a famous US-based experiment in controlling this kind of thing. How successful was that, and how successful is that as a general?
Obviously, it was a failure. What do you call it? There's a lot of violence. There was a lot of control. The underworld had an upper hand, and eventually the prohibition was repealed. And by legalizing gaming in Asian countries especially, in my own opinion, professional opinion, lots of unethical acts, corruption will be eliminated. All from the subculture of law enforcement, they view corruption from two perspectives: clean money and dirty money. Gaming money is considered clean money. But regardless, corruption is corruption.
For a lot of criminals, gaming is actually a way of washing their money, isn't it?
Exactly, legitimizing laundering their funds.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, here in Australia, there are millions and millions of dollars laundered through all the casinos here every single day, particularly drug money.
Very, very quickly, I want to just touch on a point that you made, Jaron, and that's the distinction between the Asian culture and how they're approaching the issue compared to what the West has established. Singapore has gone out of its way to create this social department which will look at this problem and try and regulate that problem. Are you convinced that that's either effective or really done with real intent?
Well, in Singapore's case, they're very efficient at these sort of administrative protocols, and I think for them to set up this department to look into these pathological cases is an excellent idea.
Robert, a quick final word from you. Do you see a difference in the development in the Asian gambling model right now to what you've seen historically in Australia?
First of all, here in Australia, we have a massive problem with gambling addiction. In Asia, I actually believe you can double that problem because culturally, from my research, Asians love to gamble and it's accepted, and
but my point being here that the government, particularly in Singapore, has actually taken seriously the points that you've been making, which is that it should be controlled and it should be examined and there should be systems put in place to deal with it.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. Look, you know, from an economical point of view, yes, it can generate income. And yes, governments make taxes, which helps hospitals and all that sort of thing. However, what the governments there, what I would encourage them to do is seriously look at understanding pathological gambling and providing treatment services.
You're right there, Robert. I do
agree
with you there, Robert. And as long as governments can make the kind of commitments to allocate resources from gaming on enforcement, on intervention, and on having counseling and psychotherapy centers, I think then this necessary evil will be beneficial to society at large.
Fantastic, and that's a great point on which to leave it. Gentlemen,
just remember, there is no structure set up at the moment.
Okay, thank you all very much indeed, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We will have to leave it.
Robert, thank you.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for on this edition of the programme. Until next time, from 101 East, bye-bye.